Welcome to GHT. I'm so excited to kick off season 3 with you and have you, and also just reconnect with you. It's been
Yes.
a while. I told everyone that you are local to me and everyone should immediately find you.
Aw,
So, welcome.
thank you. It's such an honor to be here, and I love what you're doing, and it's just fantastic to have this conversation with you.
And I need to know more. So, you came in like hot and heavy into like the metabolic world, I feel like, through the shutdown period, and I love it. And I actually don't believe I've ever had anybody on, which is crazy. Isn't that
I'm
crazy?
so honored.
I've never had anybody on talking like in depth on metabolic health. So I'm super excited, but I would love to know where like the passion came from and stemmed from before we jump in.
Yeah, sure. Great question. So, my background in undergrad was in nutrition. So, I was always kind of thinking about how food affects health from a very early time in my journey through medicine. And I just think it's one of the coolest parts of helping people be well because it is in one's control. Now, I get it. It can be difficult and it can be stressful, but I like putting the sense of like agency back into the patient, right? Like you can do something about this. You can change the outcome of your health if you are dialed in on the knowledge about it. And I think that's amazing. And I also, fundamentally, and this is without any question, like metabolic health is at the center of so many things when we're talking about optimal health. So it's just a great place to like really focus and get deeply involved because you can have so many off-stream benefits just by like dialing that little piece in.
Absolutely agree. So why don't we start with some of the basics for anybody
Yeah.
relatively new to functional medicine, nutrition, or just metabolism in general? So tell me, kind of define what metabolic health is and sort of encompasses, if you will, and also why you're so for lack of better phrasing, gung ho with the women's health portion, because I love that, right? Because there is a difference between obviously women's and men's health. So
Totally.
let's lay the
So,
groundwork.
yeah, let's talk about just like big picture definitions to start. I think oftentimes people that are not like really kind of involved in this topic think about metabolic health the same way we thought about like good metabolism at some point. Like, oh, this girl or this guy can eat all that they want, and yet their body looks amazing in a swimsuit, kind of a thing, right? And I would say metabolic health, first of all, is much more complex than that. It's much more interesting than that and has much more power than that. So, metabolic health, I would say, is how we bring in food, our different macronutrients, our protein, our fat, our carbs, bring that into our body, process it through the channels that it goes through, move it through our mitochondria, and spit it out as energy. How well do we do that, right? So that's a piece of it. And, I would say, additionally, it's like, do you do that in a way that is net neutral? Do you do that in a way that actually promotes health? Or are you doing that in a way that is literally catalyzing disease like diabetes or Alzheimer's or hormone dysfunction, whatever it may be, whatever your vulnerable axis may be, right? So if you go back to that idea of like, oh, the skinny person is the person that's like really metabolically fit. Well, in fact, only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. And yet just visually, I think we would agree that more than 12% of people look good in their genes, right? So this is a much more complex problem. In medicine, we refer to those people, it's a horrible phrase, as the skinny fat, right? And these are folks that maybe look good in their clothing, but underneath it all are like moving through these processes in a way that's actively contributing to disease. So I think that's really like an important concept to understand. It's more complex and not just food, but then stress, sleep, exercise is going to play into this big game called your metabolic journey, right? And why I think about this in women, I mean, first of all, selfishly, I'm a woman, right? So like I read a lot about how I can be my best self. And I also think that women are just not necessarily as clued in to how important this specifically is. We maybe are have been taught like, oh, if you want to like look a certain way, you should eat this and you should avoid this and don't eat the carbs and that kind of a like dialogue. And I want it to be more empowering. Like, do you want to prevent osteoporosis? Do you, yes, want to have a good body composition, but be strong and healthy? Do you want to have smooth hormone health? These are things that actually have a big impact on your day-to-day quality of life as women. So I think that's the marriage of the metabolic health with females specifically.
I think a lot of females get very caught up on scales, weight, right? Body fat percentages. Are there some things, maybe not even lab wise, we'll jump into that, but at home they can measure, at the gym that they can measure, or just like symptoms in their own body for good or bad metabolic health potentially?
I love it. Yeah, such a great question. And I think, first of all, I just want to say that like the scale is basically like self-inflicted torture, unless you're like hardcore into an exercise program and you can understand the nuance of the numbers changing all the time, it's just a stress opportunity for people, right? So in general, I'm not a huge fan of the scale, but I think the easiest thing is to use your handy dandy measuring tape, right? Like just in your sewing kit or wherever it may be in your house, pull out your measuring tape and actually do some like measurements of your body. So looking at the waist circumference and then the hip circumference, ideally, and there is some variation depending on ethnicity, but for most people, most women, 35 inches or less is really what we want to look for. And then when you're measuring that waist to hip ratio, looking for a number of 0.8, ideally 0.8 or less would be optimal. And if you're in those ranges, then you can kind of rest assured like, oh, I'm doing all right on this metabolic health thing. And if you're not, then maybe that's an opportunity for you to look a little bit deeper. I think that's probably the easiest, simplest, and I love that it's completely accessible and free for everybody tool.
Yeah, and I love it. So just another really even more simple, it doesn't always add up this way, but just using clothes as a measurement, right? Your usual clothes, like if it's one or two, a top and a bottom, right? Like jeans, like you were talking about in a shirt,
Yeah.
that you measure, because how many, even myself, like post baby, I'd be like, gosh, my weight is stagnant or going up. And I'm like, oh, I've been going to the gym and lifting weights 4 times a week. Like, where is the muscle? Because I'd be like, I feel like I'm looking different, but we're so like, it's just ingrained in females
Yes,
to be like, something's wrong and immediately have to jump on some kind of fad diet to
100%.
undo it all, when it's like you're actually getting stronger and improving hopefully the metabolic portion of it all.
Exactly right. And yet the number on the scale is just growing and growing. Yeah, but that's okay. Yeah,
It's really hard as a
it
dietitian,
is.
to just calm people kind of off that ledge and be
Oh,
like, it's
it's huge.
promise it's okay. Trust process, also like the scale and BMI are crap, so
They
ignore.
totally are. I'm with you on that
Oh
one.
my God. I digress, but I don't know if you've ever seen my husband, but he's like very tall and lean. He's like 6'2" and just has always been like more on the lower weight. And he's been
Yeah.
actively working with Kira on my team over the past few years to like gain muscle, like workout plan, like gain some weight. And he gained like 15 pounds or more. And he was like so proud of it. He's like, I finally hit 200 on a scale. And he recently went to the doctor and they told him his BMI was too
Oh,
high and
no.
that why would he want to gain weight? And I was like, let me at him. And I was like, thank God you're married to me. But oh my God, like we need to, I'm like, this is a like thin man. So it's still out there,
Upsetting.
people.
Yeah.
Doctors pressure it, but like I promise you, it's the BMI is not what you should be going off of.
No, no.
Um,
Very misleading. Yes.
yeah. So sorry, Matt, to throw you under the bus on the
No,
first episode out.
good teachable
Um,
moment. I like it.
Oh my God, he's always like, "What'd you talk about me today on the podcast?" You named a bunch of kind of metabolic related disease states or conditions, but are there some others that are super common besides osteoporosis? Obviously, type 2 diabetes, right? The whole triad of metabolic syndrome with cholesterol being high, blood pressure being high. Are there some other ones people maybe don't think about?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're especially talking about women, infertility is an important one. All of the hormone health and lack thereof of health, so PMS,
Hmm.
perimenopause, menopause, these are all important times where your metabolic health is going to have a big impact. I would say Alzheimer's disease is another big one, autoimmunity is another big one. I'm not sure if we said cardiovascular disease already, Katie, but putting that one in there too. And then just, Mark Hyman talks about the feel like crap syndrome. That's a big one.
That's
Yeah. Yes, right. I mean, so many people that come to see me that maybe like we can't, there's not a diagnosis specifically that they're dealing with, but it's like, I'm brain fogged and I'm tired and I can't get through my day. oftentimes there's a metabolic component to that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a huge one because just to improve your quality of life on a day-to-day basis is, I mean, everybody wants that, right?
Absolutely. Are there specific labs? Let's say I'm walking in, let's say Matt's going to his PCP. And he's
Yeah.
like, I'm into checking out, like I've been working on this whole thing, that we can either advocate for that, like more likely, right? There's a difference, of course, what most functional medicine doctors and traditional will order in this realm, which we could talk about, but that they either already are ordering, right? And they don't even need to advocate for themselves, or that they could probably easily get a PCP to
To
order to check
order.
on their metabolic health.
Yeah. Fair question. Can I do one grumble about this for a second? And
Absolutely.
then I will circle back to your question. So maybe I have two grumbles. I mean, most people are going to a primary care doctor, hopefully at least once a year, and getting some basic labs done. And I think most commonly, and a primary care or an internist is going to at least draw a fasting glucose, a hemoglobin A1C, and a lipid panel. And so there are some clues in those that you can glean that I'll get to in just one second that won't be a big lift for your doctor to order for you. But here are two like points of importance. One would be that the reference ranges on these labs are typically huge, right? And not all doctors are trained to say, well, this is where you really want to be versus, oh, you're in the reference range, so let's not talk about it. So for example, if you're 99 on glucose, which is at the high end of the reference range, it's possible that no one's going to have a conversation with you. But then maybe you come back a year later and you're 101 and it's suddenly like, what have you been eating? Right? This stuff exists on a spectrum. So you kind of have to start like being curious about when the numbers are shifting in the wrong direction. So that's my one grumble is we really need to be thinking about optimal ranges versus just those labs in the reference ranges that are provided for us. My second grumble is that as I've done this now for a while, different people show their metabolic dysfunction in different parts of the lab assessment, right? So somebody, let's say you just get that hemoglobin A1C and the glucose, it may look perfect for years, and then suddenly you're pre-diabetic. But there were other markers that were probably changing that are not checked, right? That could have told you 10, 20 years ahead, this is in your future, let's do something about this. Okay. So, anyways, to get to your question, sorry for that digression. I think fasting glucose can be useful, but we really want to be in that like 75 to 85 as far as the lab goes when we're talking about optimal. And the hemoglobin A1C, I mean, I think this should be 5.0, 5.2 if you're really in regular optimal glucose movement. A fasting insulin would be the next thing that I would say you could add on. And maybe your doctor will order it for you. And worst case scenario, it's about $10 to $15 if you pay out of pocket for it. And I like to see fasting insulin 5 or less. I think optimal is really like 2 to 3, but 5 or less is really quite good. And then going back to that lipid panel, you can look on a lipid panel at the triglyceride to HDL ratio as one other backdoor analysis of how is your metabolic health. Ideally, that number is at least 1 to 1. So if your HDL is 60, your triglycerides are somewhere around 60. So those would probably be easy things. There are other things that I like to order, like the sex hormone binding globulin. I sometimes will order a uric acid. I will usually look at a HSCRP, a inflammation marker, even though that's not strictly metabolic. It gives me a sense about inflammation in the body, which is going to, turn up the heat on any metabolic problems that people have. So that, yeah, sorry, grumble and then answer.
Yeah, no, it's great. And for anyone listening that is unfamiliar with some of the labs, especially the hemoglobin A1C, that is a bit more looking at that 2 to 3 month period of how stable your blood sugar has been. So that's what doctors are using to tell you, is your blood sugar been normal and you're okay? Is it pre-diabetic? Is it diabetic? I can't tell you how many times I have people come into my office and they were never even told. They're like, well, I was told I was fine. I'm like, you were pre-diabetic. Let's start there. And they have no idea and they're kind of taken aback. So definitely like pull your labs out, your most recent ones, get them checked. And if you're like, I'm 5.7 and like nobody really told me, go first of all, just get it rechecked if it's been a while. Get that, not more than every probably 3 months, but get that checked and then start over and fresh from there. And then find a good, dietitian or nutritionist that you can work with to optimize that. Especially that works with metabolic health.
Agree, 100%. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Do you order leptin a lot?
I will in a person where I think that that might be an issue. It's more commonly that I order it in someone that maybe is classically like out of a weight range that is optimal. I don't order it as a baseline test, no. But I think it can be helpful. And you can, just like insulin, you can have insulin resistance, you can have leptin resistance. And sometimes it helps people feel better to know, like, oh, I'm hungry all the time. And that's a hormone thing that's happening. That's not like, oh, I don't have good discipline in my life, right? Like there's something with your physiology that's off that we can help support.
And a lot that you can do for your insulin regulation, right, is going to help with the leptin piece. So it doesn't always like, don't
Back
stress out if
together,
you
yeah,
haven't gotten it checked. Start with the insulin piece because I agree. Sometimes it is ordered and you just don't see it. No one ever
yes,
pointed it out because it was normal, right? Which is about
100%.
on the test. So that's really helpful, I think, for everyone. So let's talk a little bit. I want to talk about all the main factors you alluded to earlier with nutrition, exercise, stress, and sleep, the two biggest ones that no one like elephants in the room. But let's talk nutrition a little bit. So first of all, I know you're a big CGM user. You, I think part of
At the moment.
levels. Yeah. So talk to me about continuous glucose monitors, pros, cons, as well as then we can dive in a little bit on the basics of the nutrition.
Sure. So CGMs, I mean, I am really excited about them. I think the opportunity, in functional medicine, we really care about the individual. And this is a great way to individualize your nutritional plan and your lifestyle plan because you're getting that feedback that is just about you. I'm now on like my 15th group of, metabolic health groups with women. And I still learn something every time, Katie, where someone is like, oh, this food for me, which classically looks like that we think of as like, this is a great food. And it is, but maybe for that person is not the best for them, right? Falafel is that thing for me, interestingly, which is like not technically a bad food at all, although I don't like to do good, bad food, but like healthy food, right? And I mean, my glucose will spike up like 50 points eating a little like ball of
Oh
falafel.
my
So, things like that I
God,
think are
fortunate.
fascinating. Yeah.
Love the
Things
falafel.
like that can be fascinating. I think the immediate feedback too, and this is true with so many things, like when you get that immediate feedback, it's such a catalyst for behavior change that can be really helpful for people. It gets into that little gaming part of our brain, right? Where we're like, ooh, let me see if I can fix this and get it better. So I think people really make swift changes that are supportive for their overall health when they're wearing them. The downsides are definitely that I think it can be costly, and for some people, it's just not accessible because of the cost. My hope is that as it becomes a little bit more mainstream, that like everything, that will go down in time. And then my other big caution is, I do think it can lead to a little bit of obsessive like
You know?
relationships with food and like making it perfect. And so really knowing yourself, if you're like, a hardcore perfectionist about everything, like maybe you just intuitively do this and not get the CGM. Or if you have, a history of an eating disorder and this stuff is really triggering for you, like maybe you just skip it, right? I don't think everyone should own one, nor do they need to, but it can be a great tool for many people.
I literally was jotting down as you said it, and I was like, orthorexia.
Yeah.
Like, is this a
Ding,
trait?
ding,
Because
ding.
I mean, I do. This is I obviously who knows? Maybe there's some research out there, but I have been doing this a long time. I've been in functional medicine for a decade, and it definitely draws a very orthorexic type of crowd, right?
Sure.
A very compulsive around food and health and being afraid of food. And so, like, I more and more, right? Even just classically as trained as a dietitian nutritionist, I like back away from food left and right. It's one of the most important things, but I'm like, I don't even want to push it the way I would. So, like, my take on how I work with patients in that way has like flipped a lot over the last like 5 or 6 years.
Really
Um,
wise. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely a very delicate balance, and more times than not, I'm like, eat the damn cookie, eat the thing, and I'm trying to like promote.
Yeah.
I just am a big
General sense of wellness, right?
community
And balance.
and
Yeah.
love and all of that. So I definitely, if you do have that tendency or any history, please do be a little bit cautious.
Yeah.
Cautious there. I even had people. I recently had someone that is they're a healthcare practitioner. I have a lot of
Uh-huh.
practitioners as patients, but they were talking about how they kept waking up in the middle of the night and their blood sugar was like, I don't remember. I think it was like spiking. And we were talking about all of this, like, take the damn thing off. I was like,
Yeah.
if this is affecting your sleep and you're fixating on your CGM overnight, like it's only going to continue to increase and put out, right, from your cortisol response, more blood sugar.
100%.
So there's nuances in there too to think about, is like it's not always the best option for everyone,
No,
maybe
no,
24/7 to have on.
right.
But I agree with
That's
you.
probably true about wearables in general, right? It's like
Right.
cool,
You're like,
but
you slept
right.
deeply. And you're like, oh my God, just relax.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Balance is key. Yes.
We could probably have a whole podcast just on that.
I think we
Um,
could.
maybe a good idea. So, no, that's really, really helpful. Is there a difference in your mind on, you don't need to answer this either, on different CGMs that are out there right now that people can access maybe without their primary care writing any kind of script for them?
I mean, you can actually purchase them on the internet, right? Like there are like the Freestyle Libre, like you can Google this and you can purchase them on the internet. I don't actually think it's that much cheaper than if you can convince your doctor to order you one. You may not qualify because you're not diabetic, but if you can convince your doctor to order you one, that's my preference because who knows what you're getting from the random internet, right? Send a prescription over to your pharmacy. You can usually go on like GoodRx, find a good coupon, and you could probably get a 2 to 4 week sensor for less than $100. And that can be pretty accessible for most people, right? And honestly, doing it one time and then never again can be really eye-opening if you are looking to have more insights around this. Not necessary, but if you're like, oh, I just really want to like, dial this in a little bit more, like one time with a sensor would probably give you a lot of information.
Yep, I agree. And so let's talk about exercise.
Yeah.
Where do you recommend that people start in their exercise, right? If people are like, or if they're overdoing it, just all kind of the things we can think about, right? Overtraining in your relationship to metabolic health and glucose output and stuff like that. So I'm interested to hear your approach with people with fitness.
Great question. This is a little hard because we're talking to the masses here on a podcast. And if I were doing this with a patient in front of me, right, it would be such a like nuanced conversation about where are you and what do you like and how do we find the thing, especially for the person who's like not exercising, but they really want to and they can't figure it out. So take this with a grain of salt, but I think for the masses, if you're someone who's like, I have no exercise program at all, my first recommendation would be, because I just like to stack things with other things, move after you eat. Have some practice of moving after you eat. I think this is good for mental health too, right? You've had lunch, you're sitting in your office, you're pounding away at your computer. You know what? This would be a great time to pause, go outside, get some fresh air, walk for 10 minutes. Nothing
It really
crazy.
has a lot of benefits for your gut as well.
So there you go.
Yep.
So easy. And that's it. Like just hang out there for a little bit and feel really good about that before you take on anything else. I think that can be a lovely way to get started for most people. In general, we like to say about 30 to 45 minutes of moderate intensity in a week, but some people are really far away from even that, right? So walking 10 minutes a couple of times a day after you eat would be amazing. And pairing that movement with the intake of food is kind of like a extra metabolic win. You're going to get a little extra juice by doing that. So that's a nice thing. And I also think just stacking behaviors makes things easier to do. On the flip side, I mean, talk about like doing a whole nother podcast, Katie. Like I work with a lot of high achieving professional women that are like wanting to knock it out of the park on every front. And yes, it's often a conversation about how do we dial it down a little bit? How do we not do, no offense to Orange Theory, like Orange Theory every single day of the week with no break and are doing this high output, high intensity cortisol driving activity that may make you feel mentally like you're doing something really good for your body, but is actually like destructive, not just like physically, but in fact, sometimes that's actually bad for metabolic health, right? That you're driving up cortisol so much and you're dumping glucose into your system, and you may actually get like worse numbers overall and not be really realizing it. So yeah, it's tricky. And those situations are extra hard because I understand there's like so much of an attachment to this just feels good for me, right? They like it.
Yep.
So having to take it down a notch can be really difficult and you just have to do it slowly and with a lot of compassion and grace.
Yeah. I definitely have a lot of patients too, just even in the gut health realm of me sort of having to push back and say, this is a big reason why we can't heal. And it's really, really hard for them to heal, especially, sorry to throw these people under the bus, but marathoners. And I'm
Oh,
like, we gotta cut back for hormonal and gut health. And it's like they're if you're a marathon runner, like you are a marathon runner, right? So you're so attached to
right.
that, and it's
Yes,
really
it's
hard.
part of your identity. Yeah.
Yeah, or like CrossFit. Really just throwing various subgroups under the bus. But it's true. There's just the ones I see in correlation and just or I tend, not everyone, but tend to overdo it and it
Right.
takes a hit. So if we're not to everything's not well and we're not handling stress well or sleeping or food, it can kind of be that straw that breaks the camel's back and worsens everything from
Right.
metabolic health to building muscle, doing everything right can be catabolic. So it's like there's all these different things that we have to we don't have enough time.
Mhm.
But that's so talk to me because I think that a lot of people are very confused, especially women probably above the age of 45 are very confused about cardio and weight training when it comes to metabolism and getting stronger and all these things as we especially I just feel like my mom's generation and on
Yes.
was all about cardio, right? So talk to me about the pros and cons of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I don't know, like somewhere in our society, we set it up that like dudes lift weights and girls do cardio. Like somehow that was like, I mean, and that's even the way that I grew up. I kind of learned that that was what I was supposed to do. Maybe I could do some yoga too, but I mostly would do like cardio stuff and really light weights, and I would do it really fast. And the bottom line is it doesn't actually promote health in women, especially after a certain age. So once you're in this like perimenopause time, which can technically be as early as 35, right? When your hormones are just starting to shift, we are actively starting to lose muscle mass during this time. And when we're doing, and a lot of other things are happening, right? We're under more stress. Maybe we're moms and we're taking care of older parents. Like the stress part of life is really activated. So we're in this higher stress physiology because our hormones are kind of coming down. We are naturally losing muscle mass on our own. And doing this kind of like all the time cardio bunny stuff is actually just turning those things up higher, right? So it's going to make sleep worse. It's going to make stress worse. And actually, some people, you will find that they can be cardio bunnies forever and it's fine. But many of them will start to feel frustrated. And I hear from these women all the time, right? Like, I work out all the time. And yet, like, I'm not getting the results that I want on every front, right? Like sleep or my hormones or literally my body composition. And so thinking about actively putting on muscle mass as we get older as women is really important. It's protective for, the things that we care about to have the best quality of life and longevity, but it's also back to that like day to day, month to month reality of how you feel. Like muscle is magic. Having muscle on your body will protect you from disease, but also make you feel amazing. Your brain will work better, your hormones will work better, like things will just feel incredible. So I can't champion or emphasize enough how important it is for women to be doing some kind of resistance training. And you have to start where you are, right? So it may be that you start with, okay, you're lifting like a 2 pound weight and you're kind of getting a little better at that. And then you move to bigger weights. But I am actually an advocate for like bigger compound movements with big weights. Like I'm up in the boy section of the gym when I work out.
Yeah. Um, so I also want to say, well, so this is I have multiple things going through my head. One was going to be to reiterate the fact of like you're probably going to gain or not lose weight immediately when you start to lift and gain muscle.
Sure.
Just please
Sure. Yeah, put that out there.
keep that in your mind. Because a lot of women shy away is they don't want to bulk, they don't want to gain weight, and they're seeing a scale when they're trying to actively change their body composition. It's very stressful.
This is
Um,
true.
yeah, so keep that in mind. Um, the other one is like complete. Oh, if you are new to working out, even or if you're not new, I
Yeah.
would highly recommend finding some kind of personal trainer or somebody. Even it doesn't need to be. I feel like when we picture personal trainers, we just picture like these like beefy dudes that are
Huge.
in the
Yeah, huge ripped
gym.
dudes.
But
Yeah.
like even myself, after I had a C-section, I was like, I found somebody who was a corrective movement specialist, and like it really and I was like, I don't want to be in a gym. So they had this own little individual room and I started to
That's
like
awesome.
get back into it. And then we moved, long story short, but like we moved and I had to stop my personal training and I was doing it on my own. And I was like, starting January, I was like, I'm getting back in the gym. So I did like 4 months.
Yeah.
And I was a Division I athlete. I know how to lift weights. So like
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I got this. And I was doing it. And I was like, I just keep repeating the damn same things over and over. And so I reached back out and a lot of them will just write you plans and like link how to do them so you don't have to be overwhelmed. So that's been huge too. So like never feel like you should know something or you're not good enough or you just shy away. Cause like I almost did it and just kept doing the same stuff at the gym. And I was like, I have a lot of muscle injuries. And I was like, I am just pissing off my shoulder like left, right. So he sent it. And now I have a whole game plan for 2 weeks at a time to go do stuff. And it's very inexpensive. And
Right.
just don't be nervous or uncomfortable to reach out to people that can help you. There's a reason they have a job. So
It's such good advice, and you took the words out of my mouth, which is what I was going to say, is like find someone to help you feel more comfortable because it can be intimidating actually to go into a gym. And, that can be the reason that many people just don't even go because they're
it
like,
absolutely
great,
is. I like think about myself. I'm like, literally, Division One basketball, we had to lift weights as a job. Like, and
you
I still
need
was
that
like,
stuff.
know how to do the things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, this is easy. I forgot. But you need guidance, or it's just like anything, even like why you work with a nutritionist, right? Like
Right.
you know how to eat well, but maybe you don't know how to stick to it or tweak when you need or eat for
Exactly.
hormonal health. So it's like everyone has a specialty. And I just encourage you in any of these facets we're talking about to work with somebody if you can afford to do so that specializes and can at least give you guidance temporarily to kind of have a game plan.
I think that's so wise. And I have no affiliation, but I've been starting to use the Ladder app, which is kind of like it's basically like they give you the videos of the exercises that you may want to do so you can see form and like structure a little bit. It's not the same as working with someone one-on-one that's actually going to look at your body. But if you're like, oh, I need a little help, but I don't know if I can afford a personal trainer, like there are many apps now and they've got the
Yeah.
videos. Here's your workout, here's the video that you actually see how you do it for like $20 a month, which is quite
Pretty
accessible.
affordable. Yeah. I mean, because the video portion and having that is very helpful because yeah, it's just being able to see the movements, I think is really, really makes it less overwhelming to
Totally.
individuals.
150%.
I
Yes.
highly recommend it. Can we talk? Okay, so everyone hates talking about this, but sleep and stress. I want to talk about both of them. The stress piece, right? Everyone's like probably like, I'm gonna zone out now. Um, there's so many things we could talk about with how stress impacts your metabolic health, but can you tell us some of those and also talk about people's cortisol patterns, and we could talk about incorporate into sleep on this, I think, a little bit.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so boring message, but factual message. Stress and sleep are huge impact variables on metabolic health, but on health generally, right? Like we all are thinking about this no matter what. If you're talking about stress, and just to like remind us on stress physiology, right? Like when we have a stress response, we're going to have a rise in cortisol, and we're going to have like a simultaneous rise in adrenaline, and these things will kind of tell your body that there's bad stuff happening. And as a result of that, if we think back in evolution, this was the time obviously that we were going to run from the tiger, and there's a bunch of glucose that's going to get dropped into your system as a result of this. So going back to the CGM data, I think something that's been really enlightening for many people that I work with is to see that in action, to see how it's like, whoa, I haven't eaten anything for 4 hours. This has nothing to do with food. And my glucose is just going up and up and up. And it's because I have a deadline, or I'm about to speak in front of a big crowd, or whatever it may be, right? To just really see that, because it does get a little glib at some point when we're just like, oh, stress is really important. Stress management is really important. You should get enough sleep at night. But when people see it, to go back to maybe one of the benefits beyond the food piece, is really seeing in real time how stress affects you is it's upsetting, but it's also really empowering, right? To kind of understand that. And when we go to the sleep side, and then we can talk about like, what can we try to do? Although, most of this we know, it's more like doing it that's the problem. On the sleep side, there are studies where you will sleep deprive someone for 7 days, and they will have biomarkers that look like they're pre-diabetic, right? After 7 days, that's how much it's that same physiology, right? Your cortisol is up, your body thinks that you are in danger. It's just dumping out glucose like nobody's business. And to your body, that glucose is all the same, whether it comes from food or it comes from stress or it comes from sleep deprivation. So the negative outcomes associated with that are therefore the same too.
Do you with sleep, I guess this is a random scenario. How do you, as a doctor, let's say when your patient comes in, and you're like, they could definitely improve their sleep. They could definitely improve their stress management, like therapy referral. You could refer or a nutrition. Like you're like, they're not really blood
I
sugar
do.
monitoring. Where do you start? What is it depend on the person? Is it exercise? Like what is the maybe one or two most influential pieces of the puzzle to you?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to like what is the specific story because it really depends. But just as a general matter, like sometimes I have like stopped all things to just be like, we need to get your sleep dealt
Mm,
with. I am not diving into all of these other labs for you to get stressed out about until we get you sleeping. And that can be maybe they go do some CBT with a sleep specialist for a little bit, and then they come back after they've done that work and they're actually at least, sleeping 6 hours a night. I mean, I definitely have had people that are like, oh, I'm working on like 3 hours a night of sleep and just like caffeineing my way through the day. And yet they're tired, their hair is falling out, like their gut is a mess, and they have metabolic markers that are terrible. And they're like, can you fix this for me? Like, what are the supplements I need to take? That that's not a thing. I wish it was. Like,
yeah.
we would probably be rich and famous if so, but that's not a thing. So I think it's more like really, giving back the message sometimes that those foundational lifestyle things are way more important than any like cool treatment plan I can put together for you, because I can do things all day long over here in the cool treatment plan department, but if you're not sleeping and have some reasonable amount of stress management, it's just going to be like throwing things at a wall that are going to keep bouncing back at us,
The problem is the foundational lifestyle pieces aren't sexy.
They are
They
not
aren't
sexy at
influential. They
all.
still, even the functional, 90% of functional people still want a magic answer. They just want it to be natural, which is, we still have a lot of work to go, to do and go. I feel like it's like this whole like subset of integrated and functional healthcare exists, which we need and is amazing. And it's like, but we still have so far to go in understanding and educating that like it isn't simple fixes. You still have to even more so be in it to win it, because we're talking about all the foundational
Yes.
pieces that you don't want to hear.
That's right. And to be fair, it is complicated obviously because our society is set up for us to all be crazy,
Yep.
like and keep like deprioritizing those lifestyle variables. So it really requires like an enormous amount of just sheer grit to say, okay, I'm going to take this on, and because I really care about my health being better.
Yep.
And it's tough.
Yep. I think I like everything you say makes me think a lot. I actually wrote down like new moms and postpartum moms is one of the biggest strugglers, because they have everything from their hormones just being a mess for a
Correct.
while, for years potentially, right? So for
Yes.
years, they're probably not sleeping, they're probably not eating regularly or balanced and sort of just trying to exist. Their stress is very high, right? Are they moving? Do they have a C-section? Like all of those things. So it's like, I would love if you have any advice on like maybe some doable steps for new moms, and even moms of just like toddlers like myself, that it's a lot to, and you put your children first usually. So it's like, how do you do
Yeah.
anything?
Well, partially speaking as the doctor and partially speaking from experience here, I think it's one thing that I think is really important is to realize you can't do all the things all the time, especially when you have a new child, right? Because many people, at least my population of people, are still like, well, I want to exercise and I want to get the sleep right and I want to eat perfectly and I want to take care of my baby and I want to nurse and I want to,
You're like,
okay, like some
someone's
of
got to
it's
try.
like, yeah, you got
Some
to
old
just
things are going to be 50% for a while.
that's exactly right. I think it's such an important message to be like, you are doing amazing by being alive for this
Yeah.
beautiful human that you made. And that is an enormous win by itself, hands down, nothing else, right? And other than that, I think resting your body where you can is the other big thing. And this is more like do what I say and not what I do, because I did not do this well, but I also really learned the hard way. The first time that I actually like was ever sick was postpartum, and it was because, and 2 years postpartum, and it was because I was doing that, like the let me try to do everything, and my life is exactly the same as before I had a baby, and now I have a baby, but I'm going to do all the same things at the same tempo and like intensity. You just can't.
No, I actually had somebody interview me recently, and they asked, and they're like, how are you doing it all type of thing? I was like, I'm not. Something always takes a hit, whether it's my business or my family, or you feel like you're doing 50% on being a mom, being this. It's like never a great feeling. And I mean, I think one of the biggest things I actually learned, this is more, I mean, it's coming from both as a healthcare professional as also just a human,
Yeah.
is to actually not feel uncomfortable saying like I need help or like I'm overwhelmed. It took me a while. I think for my first year, like my child is a terrible sleeper and I didn't sleep through the night until like probably almost a year and a half. So it was like well over a year before I ever got a night of sleep ever. And I'm still struggling with it, but whole other story. But it took me like a year of like breastfeeding, doing all the things to finally be like, I need more help. Like
Yes.
I am a business owner. I have all the things. I'm growing my
Yes.
business. Like I can't go to the gym. I can't eat. Like it was just all these things. I remember even talking to Kira, who does a lot of our metabolic health at our practice,
Yeah.
and I'd be like, "Oh, I want to do like I want you to look at like my macros for a couple days. I don't really count macros or do any of it, but it was kind of like when I was starting to feel like myself after the baby, and she
Totally.
was like, "I'm not doing that until you just start eating food."
Mhm.
I was like, "Listen," and she was like, "You're not eating enough. I've seen you eat. You do not eat enough." And I was like, "I don't have the time. Like it's just easier
No.
to take care of all my patients, all my
And all
family."
the other things. Yep.
So I just I guess the point of the whole story is that like we've been there, we feel you. Like, do not be ashamed to ask for help. Do not be ashamed to find people like how I found a personal trainer, or you can find it if it's an RD under your insurance if you can't afford it. Like, find ways to gain that support because even if it's just you spend money to like have a babysitter once a week so you can de-stress like truly
Totally.
like but
It's
don't
huge.
expect to be super mom. No one, every one of you is a super mom. Don't expect for it to be 100% in every
Doesn't exist.
it doesn't
I
exist.
know. Yeah, the biggest thing, I was so obsessive about making my children's own food. Like that was one thing that I just refused to give up. But I had to. And then I felt like my life changed for the better because I still told this person, this is how I want you to make the food for my kids, but it was no longer me doing it. And it just freed up so much space for me to actually like be present with them and like be with them in the way that I want instead of kind of cooking and talking to the two of them at the same time. Like you
Yeah.
just, yeah, you've got to give up some things of
Yeah.
control and it's
I
worth
had
it.
to do that with, honestly with breastfeeding towards the end when I realized he was already showing signs of like wanting to
Yeah,
wean.
he was
And it
ready.
was like I mean I was trying to work and like I wouldn't even get a time to eat because every single break I had to run and breastfeed and like do this.
Totally. Yep.
And I finally was like, I like felt so guilty and had to be like, Matt, this is okay.
That's
And
the
he's like, oh my
worst.
God, like you do what you need to do. And even just moving to pumping was better. But that was a huge one. And then making the choice to like actually cut business time to be able to go back to the gym, even if it was a couple times a week.
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's really hard for people to do, including me, right? So
Yep.
we have to make sacrifices anyway,
That's
in
right. Yeah.
health processes. Um, so important sleep, sleep, sleep. Are there things that people can do from home to kind of re-regulate some of their circadian rhythm and balance?
Yeah, I mean, I really like people to kind of like bookend their days with some like simple practices that are not going to feel earth-shattering. And that's just because they're not, but they are important, right? Shut down the brain activity at some point in the evening. For me, I have learned that that's 10 p.m. And that's just by watching myself. If I start doing things, even stuff that I love, but that's activating my brain after 10 p.m., I can't sleep.
Yeah,
I sleep poorly.
yeah,
So ideally, you know, you're setting up the stage, you're creating a sanctuary for yourself to really like signal back to your brain that it's time to wind down. That can be turning down lights and using candles, that can be getting off your screen, that can be engaging in a juicy meditation before you go to bed. Doing things that actually are relaxing in that last hour, I think is really important. And in the morning, I really encourage my patients to not touch their phone as the first thing that they do, right?
mhm,
It's hard
yeah,
and but it's so important. Like get up, like have a moment, touch your heart, take a breath, or connect with a spouse or a loved one or an animal. Go outside, have sunshine on you so you can get that little signaling from the sun to be in the right circadian rhythm. And then come back. I'm talking about like, you know, 5 to 7 minutes where you're not like, oh, what are my emails and what does my day look like immediately to start that stress cascade so early. Those are really the simple things that I always am saying kind of ad nauseum to people and to myself sometimes too. I fail at this also. It's really like we collectively have to work on this as humans.
like daily reminders.
Yeah.
What do you feel about people who exercise at night?
I mean, I think that if it works for you, fabulous.
Yeah,
But I think if you're really paying attention, it's probably getting you a little too amped and it is going to make sleep harder. But I certainly have had patients that can work out at 9 o'clock, come home, take a shower, and they sleep perfectly afterwards. I think it's rare, but my recommendation is not to, if you have options for other times, but I guess if that's the only time you've got, it's the only time you've got.
I know it is a tough. That's again now prioritizing sleep. You know what I mean? Stress
Yeah.
management, sleep, or
Yes.
exercise.
Yes.
Um, that was really no. That's a good one. The most random things that come to my brain. So if somebody's at home and they're listening and they want some easy takeaways. We've given a lot of them, but some starting points. Like, what are three very tangible things that an individual can do to help support their metabolism and their metabolic wellness?
Yeah. So I would say switch to savory. So we're, like without getting too into the weeds on this, but yet like honoring this principle, are there things that you eat that you could be equally pleased about eating something that's in the savory category instead, right? So if breakfast is a Krispy Kreme donut, I'm giving the extreme example here, like what could you eat? Could you have eggs and some avocado on the side instead? So switching to savory conceptually, I think is like a nice way to do it. That's like big enough, that doesn't feel stressful, but allows people to move the needle. Probably food sequencing would be in there too. So, trying to think about as much as possible having balanced macros when you consume food. People often are doing that for their breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but snacks
Mm-mm.
tend to be more of a free for all. Like, oh, I'm just going to eat a whole bag of potato chips. And okay, eat the bag of potato chips, but maybe like have a couple nuts or a meat stick along with it so that you have a little bit more of a balanced blood sugar response. That would be number two. And then probably number three would just be what we talked about earlier, move when you eat. So like take a little journey and have a mental health break at the same time. Like take a little walk after you've eaten something. Our ancestors all did this, and I think it's such a great practice for our health on so many levels, and I would say easy enough to do.
Yeah. Can you shed a moment of light on, or at least your opinion on, more so the 5 to 6 small meals and grazing versus having like 3 or 4 more balanced, larger meals throughout the day, kind of spaced out about 3 or 4 hours?
Yeah, so it depends on the person. So if I'm working with somebody that's like more metabolically unhealthy, like I actually have biomarkers that are not in the right direction, I might encourage them to have full meals that they're eating, and then they're giving themselves both the digestive rest, but also the metabolic rest to not be like, triggering a little bit of insulin throughout the day. Um, and then on the other hand, like the athlete that's like trying to gain weight and trying to activate their metabolism, yeah, it might be that eating 5 to 6 meals a day is totally fine and not going to have any negative impact on them. So it really just depends on the person.
Yeah. And I do find, both as a teen who struggle with it, but there's a lot of individuals obviously that have, we know, just kind of separating imbalance and not great blood sugar as a whole, and actually having hypoglycemic reactions to
Right.
meals. Sometimes, right? So like my advice, just as, at least it's very general advice, but as a dietitian, when your blood sugar is so wonky, and I'm talking the people who are getting shaky, passing out, like the
Sure.
sweat in
Sure.
there. If that's happening to you, first of all, please work with somebody, both a doctor and a nutritionist on this one. But if that is happening to you, sometimes you do have to do the grazing of those stable small meals to get to where you're actually feeling well enough, where you're stable enough to start eating
Move
more
back.
spaced out
Yeah,
to have.
that's really
Yeah.
good.
So people always think, and they push like you need to be separating your meals. It's like that person's not well enough at that moment to do that, in
Yeah,
my
you
opinion.
can't handle it. Right.
No, get yourself feeling just stable enough in eating where you're not just pounding, candy and orange juice to try to get a high back up.
Yeah.
And then work with somebody on being able to kind of have that gradual
Pull it
spacing
back.
time.
Yeah, and get each meal to be stable enough that keeps you sustained. Yeah, totally. Really good advice. Yeah.
So always focusing on protein, fat, fiber, every meal, guys. Anything I'm missing that were a big, I mean, we could talk about this forever. Any, any big overarching themes we're missing?
No, I guess I would just end on saying like, metabolic health is really, it's such a gem in really activating optimal health, generally speaking. And if you can dial that in, you can really like tap into longevity in a really meaningful way. So just a cheerleading moment for that.
Cheerleading mode. How can all of our listeners find you and maybe work with you on your, hormonal and metabolic wellness?
Oh, thanks for asking, Katie. So, my only real social media outlet is Instagram, and it's just my name. So, Anjali Dsouza, MD, is the handle. And then, as far as the practice goes, we're in the DMV and see people in the DMV, and some people outside of the DMV, depending on where you are. And the practice is District Center for Integrative Medicine, so DCI Medicine online.
And And tell me more about the group. Do you have to be a patient of the practice in order
No,
to
so
get
good
involved?
question. Yeah, no. So we work with many people that are not actively patients, and for me, this has been an opportunity to provide care for folks that maybe wouldn't be able to invest in becoming a one-on-one patient, but really want to level up their health. The Women's Health Network is one thing that I have, which is Your Goddess Health Unleashed, which is just an online private platform where we're doing a lot of like health coaching, health support, nutritional counseling. We have weekly meetings. Some are Ask Me Anythings, and others are didactic for people to just learn some of the basics around really getting the health that they want. And then there are like offshoot groups. The latest one I'm working on is going to be like a hormone health group for women who are 30 to 55, basically. But I've run these metabolic health groups a lot, and they are a great way for you to do a lot of good medical work without having to have the one-on-one time and financial commitment.
Well, it sounds like people shouldn't sit on this. I'll definitely put all the information and tag you so people can
Thank you.
follow you and reach out, because it sounds like a really needed and great opportunity.
It's been lovely chatting with you.
You too. Thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, what an honor.